Where was I? So as a former software engineer, my team was a bunch of software engineers at the time. We had some designers on the team, but we were all basically makers. So we were quick to just jump into building stuff. And we didn't really have the tools, the training to slow the conversation down, back people up, understand the problem space. And design sprints became one of the first tools that we started to use with great success, varyingly great success. Sometimes we ran sprints and it led to the same ideas that the group had been talking about. Other times we ran sprints on unclear, unimportant problems. And in that latter case, that's when we realized that sprints and creating prototypes, really just ideation workshops, are a great vehicle for figuring out what solution, potential solutions that you want to build, but it doesn't really efficiently challenge and articulate the problem that that sprint is intended to solve for. So we wanted to sort of separate out, if y'all are familiar with the double diamond process from the designer's toolkit, we wanted to make sure that we separated out the problem discovery phase, which is what problem framing aims to unpack and explore, from the solution validation phase, which is where design sprints have a part in. So we kind of separated those out. If you look at sort of the textbook definition of a design sprint, there's this understand phase to it. But it was a little vague and unspecific. Those mean the same thing. It was a little vague, and there were some problems that we ran into trying to do that understanding phase on the day of the sprint. So we basically separated those out, and we did a lot of research and found other people that were talking about problem framing and research and discovery. And we put together a process that we now run before 99.9% of all of anything related to ideation and prototyping and testing different solutions. So that's my story, who I am, and with how we came to discover problem framing. What I'll do in terms of this session is I'll answer some questions that come up. So how the board works itself is these are open questions. I think these are all from past sessions, but I leave them in here to give you all time to ask some questions and just put them in here. If nobody asks any right away, then I'll just start to work through these. But as soon as I see your new questions come in, I'll jump into those. And whenever there's a break, I'll just take about 5 or 10 minutes and I'll just walk you through our problem framing toolkit, which is intended to give you the tools and the training based on what we know about framing so that you can go and run it on the projects that you're working on. Hope that sounds good. Am I still yeah, okay. So let's answer some questions. And there's always only a few. These are never really like huge gatherings. So I'll just take your question, and if you want to like come off mute and further refine it or go deeper, feel free to jump in there.
Jay, maybe I put mine in the wrong place. I put it in the third column in the process activities. Did I put it in the wrong spot?
Where are you at, Billy? I see you here. I'm sorry, I missed what you said. You said, oh, there you go. This is your question here? Cool, I see it. Okay, let's start with yours then. So, how much do you coach the participants in the harbor section? Do you just take what they offer? Or do you ask them to drill further? It seems you get the harbor themes wrong because of bias, politics, et cetera. The whole session runs in the wrong direction. Okay, so what, let's.
So the context is, you've got a leader who, what do you want to build? And I want to build this thing, and you can't really get them off that ledge, right? We've all had that. And in a longer, I mentioned, I don't have time for research, I don't have time for, enough money. We would be able to build evidence that the problem they want to build, or the solution they want to build, the problem they want to solve is not the right problem. There's 5 whys or whatever, we'd be able to get to a deeper, better human-centered problem. And coming into this with not a lot of research, not a lot of prep, just maybe a meeting or two with the stakeholders where they already tell you what their priorities are and what they want to go do. How do you bridge the gap between what they think they want to do and getting the right themes into the harbor? So you're not running this entire exercise on their assumptions that what they want to build is what humans want.
Yeah. And when Billy's mentioning the harbor, so there's an activity, the first activity that I often do as part of my problem framing process is part of like prioritization. So for me, problem framing means the outcome of problem framing for me means being able to clearly articulate the next top most important problem or opportunity that you and a group of people would like to work on next. It's not many problems. It's not many experiences or lots of solutions. It's one. And in order to do that, I run a 3-step prioritization process to get down from many that are on the roadmap that the group are thinking about, that external stakeholders are pushing forward, going from many down to that one. And there is, as a related tangent, there is a free problem prioritization toolkit that I've created that you can find through our website if you're interested in seeing what that's like. And so the first piece of prioritization is a step that I call problem discovery. And in order to get started with that step, this activity itself, many of the activities in here, I've borrowed and tweaked from the design, a design thinker's toolkit. And so the sailboat activity is intended to talk about the things that are going well. So often the way that this works normally is you start by talking about what are the projects, the things that we can celebrate as a way to just kind of like get the team off and running in the conversation. And then you pull them into the problem space and say, what are the opportunities or the business challenges that you as a team would like to focus on? And that's a way to sort of democratize and bring a structured group conversation to figure out the next set of problems to work on, as opposed to just kind of like corner office, top down, command and control style, right? The things that don't tend to work so well anymore. So what I noticed is that if we were to just start in that sort of like open space, I noticed that it would be a very apples and oranges discussion. So the example I always give is you'd have like, VP of customer success talking about like general brand perception of a new experience that exists in the market. And then you'd have an architect or an engineer or a content strategist talking about like very specific low level problems that they see their customers struggling with. And that's difficult to say, okay, let's bring these together and figure out which we want to work on, because often there's a relationship between them. So what I did is I added a sort of another component to problem discovery, which I just, in the theme of sailboats and whatnot, I called it the harbor. And the idea behind the harbor is to level set the group in terms of the themes that they're excited to work on. And because framing is a strategic conversation, it often requires director, VP, senior vice president type people to weigh in on what those themes should and should not be. And so with all that context, now I can start to answer Billy's question. So Billy, what I try to do, number one, I try to make sure that I interview those people beforehand so that I have a one-on-one with them so that I understand what's important to them, what should we focus on, what's important that we don't talk about at this point. And that may look like technology, market, industry, sector, competition, use of technology. You and I in the past have had like lots of conversations around conversations that begin with trying to have an application of technology to it. So figure out problems to solve with AI. Right. So like I have those conversations one-on-one with stakeholders so that I can hear them and make sure that they're all captured. That might be one way that I start the conversation. So I spoke with this person, this person, this person. Only one of them is here with us today, but here's the general here's the general feedback from senior leadership about what they'd like us to focus on and not focus on. And in those one-on-ones, then I have more time, and there's less like performance anxiety for that senior level person. I can nudge them away from being so solution minded, or just ask them enough questions that they're willing to be a little bit more open-minded in terms of what the group might come up with. So that's one way. I do a lot of one-on-ones if possible, especially with folks that say they're interested but can't devote the time to the session. And then the other thing I would do, of course, is to, if I can, of course, if there's time and there's budget, I would do any amount of research and bring it in, or just work with a research team and bring in what they know to be customer related problems within that space. I'm working with a group, a big bank right now, and we have stakeholders from many parts of the company, and it's a really broad topic. So we're doing 3 rounds of sort of rapid contextual inquiry interviews with their customers across a few different personas. And we'll start our framing session. We'll do our one-on-ones with the stakeholders, but then when we actually kick off the session before the harbor, we'll say, here's what we learned from the customers. Here are some of the challenges that they have within this space, and then allow the group to make their own connections in terms of what they feel like are the important problems to pull out from that information. And some choose not to listen to it. Billy, to your point, they say like, I'm here to work on this thing. But at least then I've sort of like level set the conversation based on actual customer insights.
Good, thanks.
Cool. Hard question. Okay. I'm going to zoom out. Did anyone else add a question? You can just wiggle it around like that.
I didn't, but that kind of brings up a question for me. Would you prefer that I type it on a sticky right now?
Yeah, or I can type while you talk. I'll try to do my best to sort of like synthesize your question as you.
Okay. So the last thing you just said, to level set and to kind of get on the same page as far as customer input or feedback. So how far do you go as far as research or interviewing customers for this kind of a workshop?
So let's see. I think what you're asking is how much customer research should you do before? This is a very good question. The company who I just mentioned, the big bank that I'm working with, my counterpart that works at the bank and myself have had multiple conversations about this, because the point of problem framing is to figure out which space to work in, which theme, and then which problem, and then which part of the problem, and which sort of like persona related to that problem. So you continue to do this like shaping and narrowing. And so problem discovery research is tricky because you can go and ask 5 people or 50 people a set of questions, and in that research, they point you in a different direction from where you thought the framing session was going to be geared toward. So the question that she and I have been going back and forth on is to answer some executive questions that have come to her, fallen on her shoulders. Why 5 people? Why 10 people? Why this group? Why this space? Why this part of the experience? Why are you doing the research that you're doing? And the best answer we've been able to come up with is that it's a start, and it's meant to inform the conversations, because otherwise framing with 10 people that work in the company is just a more structured way of doing the things that we've always done, which is just to kind of like guess what we think is the most important thing to work on. So my answer is just enough. Erica Hall wrote a book called Just Enough Research, which I agree with parts of, but same, it's like, what's the fewest amount of people that we can get that is an additional and outside perspective in this space than what we already know based on from the internal expertise we have inside the company. So for this thing, which is this huge topic that's affecting their entire net promoter score and impacts their call center and has all of these sort of like secondary repercussions, we think it's this thing based on what's happening with some of the customers, but we're really unclear. And we don't even know if it's being measured correctly. We don't know if that's impacting the NPS. We don't know. They have dozens of personas that are affected by this problem for different reasons. So on one hand, we can just talk to a small group of people and figure out where we go next. Or on the other, we could just say like, we need 3 months to talk with everyone and figure everything out so that we can have one workshop together. So it's probably the former, right? And sometimes like framing itself for me is just a step to help us figure out where we go next. So everything's fairly iterative. That's like super idealistic, and it's hard to sell that in. And I think I just saw a question about selling this stuff in. I had another conversation with a woman that was in charge of experience design at PayPal, or I'm not sure if it was PayPal or GoDaddy, but she was also talking about this sort of like slow burn of selling in iterative discovery work. And it's really hard because at first it's kind of like, well, we have to do this to figure out, I have to do this in order to answer your questions about where we go next. And sometimes obviously that's hard to sell. Is that helpful, Anne?
Yes, thanks, Jay.
Yeah, just enough is a shitty answer, but unfortunately.
That's kind of how it goes. I mean, I'm a researcher, so you know, that's my life story. So it's okay.
Yeah. Rick, was this you?
Yeah, I added that late.
Cool.
On a yellow post-it and I switched.
Okay. Let's see. So Rick asked, how do you sell problem framing your customers' clients, assuming clients aren't coming to you, but rather you're selling the idea?
And just, I think that's a compliment, you know, Jay, you and your brand and what you've built. It's easy, I think, for big customers to come to you. You've got the case studies and the war stories. And
oh man, yeah, I've got it all figured out. I just have I have a line of customers around the block just waiting for the problem for me. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, to some degree, it's a lot of like storytelling and proof. Like for example, I put out the problem framing toolkit for sale in November of 2019, and it's like it sold like I don't know, 100 people have bought it, right? Like, and I put a lot of content into it.
Yep.
To sell it, yeah, of course, you know, it's not like a cash cow for the company, but I built it. So
I didn't mean
to sell it.
Sorry, just to clarify, I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't mean the methodology. I actually was one of the 100 and I love it. If you're taking that, you know, into a business, customer client within your own business, and you're trying to get people to think in terms of problem framing and breaking it down and doing a session, how do you sell that piece? Mm-hmm. The idea, the concept and importance of problem framing.
Yeah. Through stories, through examples of, if we go down this path, in my experience, this is what tends to happen. And it's like, it could work. So I've run plenty of sprints without framing, or I can't say that I've built any products and taken them to market that have worked without it. I actually, yeah, not to diverge too much. It's storytelling. It's showing them what it will look like to go in this path versus this path based on what I've seen. And most of the time, like I had a conversation with my buddy Richard Banfield. He was writing a book for Envision, and he asked me, he was like challenging me, what if a sprint is only 3, 4, or 5 days, why would you try to do anything before then? Why not just get people in the room and figure it out? And the answer to that is because it's demoralizing and de-energizing, probably better words than that, to get people excited and committed to do this thing that is also probably new for some or all of them, only to fall on your face. And so like a sprint can fall on its face if you have the wrong people in the room, you're working on an unimportant problem. I mean, those two are good enough. And so the way that I sell it is to point to it and say, look, if we're like, the easiest way to sell it is to say, look, your goal is to run a design sprint. Sometimes groups now are just, they're not even focused on the end product or service. They're just excited to run a design sprint because they've heard it. It's a silver bullet for everything, always. And so like, you know, if your goal is to run a successful design sprint, and we get into that room and we have 3 stakeholders talking about the problem through different lenses, or focused on a different customer segment, or we have the wrong people in the room and we have to stop, or we get to the end and our customers tell us like, this isn't important at all, and I'm fully comfortable with the solutions I have, then that's it's a false start and a failure. And so I say, like, in about a half a day, we can make sure that we should get people together for 3 or 4 or 5 more days. And that tends to work pretty well. And then, like you said, more stories, more use cases, more explaining where will we be at the end of this. And also continually, of course, shrinking the timeline always helps to sell it in. This is a half a day. We're not going to have everything figured out, but it's really important in order to take the next step.
Because I use this as a lead in for also the strategy work that we do. So I'm getting stakeholders to think about the future possibilities, your harbor, getting them to agree on actually what the harbor is and all the problems that stand in the way. And I was just, you know, this is the lead in to everything that we do, be it the strategy or like you said, the design sprint that follows. But
yeah, well, the other thing too, even just chunking framing down even more. So sometimes, like, maybe going back to Billy's question, maybe they're like, we'll do some framing, that's fine, but I really want it to be on this thing. And so there's not like a group conversation around prioritization, and you might just start in the space of like mapping out what the current experience looks like for a persona or two. And so like by focusing on part of the conversation that's more important to them, and then just making it a smaller session altogether. So then fine, let's just get together for 1 hour with the group to make sure that we're clear on the problem. And even like in the most extreme scenario where there's a lot of extended arms saying like, no, we don't need this. Even just having the group individually email me what they think the challenges that we're all there to work on, and then capturing it and distributing it back. Often, I always tell people, often that's like enough to sell in problem framing, because I say like, here's what everyone thinks we're working on. And it's like, talk about apples and oranges. It's like completely different things. And they're like, that's good. I thought this was clear. I thought everyone understood that we were coming to do this thing. And it's most of the time, it's very unclear.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I say something about that real quick too?
Yeah.
I myself, to sell the problem framing, concept. I put together just like 2 decks. A lot of it was from your content, Jay, but also, like you said, just kind of telling the story. And I added some quotes from, like, Albert Einstein has a great quote: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And another one is: a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So I put together something, that told the story really well, and it went over great. So if that helps at all, it seemed to work for me. So
It's really cool too. It's great when things work well. What I find to be even more helpful is the questions they still had. The resistance. Were they like doing cartwheels, Anne? Or were there still some things where they're like, but what about this thing?
yeah, well, it's funny. So my direct manager, the UX manager, was like, really got it right away, and was on board. His boss, our VP of product, had a lot more questions, and but I think that, maybe your content is so great that it was not hard for me to put together something quickly that was impactful. So I've been really actually delightfully surprised how easy it was to get everyone on board with this.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they're going to be spending us so much money on this design sprint. It just makes a lot of sense to set it up properly.
Yeah. I might follow up with you one-on-one just to hear some of the questions that the VP asked.
Okay.
Those are helpful for me to hear. Okay, so we got this one, this one, this one. Let's see, are there any others so far? These are old ones. Let me just take 5 minutes and I'll do a quick walkthrough of the toolkit. Before I do that, down here, there's a few additional things. Facilitation will make or break any kind of workshop or sprint or brainstorming session. So I've created these couple different resources for folks. One is a course. This is like, you get 30 lessons, 1 lesson per day in your inbox. Basically just frameworks, tips, ideas that I've learned over the years. I created it a couple of years ago. This thing is a little bit more current. This is an ongoing video series where I talk with folks most of the time leading UX, leading research, design, product, and they come and talk about stories and ideas that they've experienced when trying to get groups together in workshops, doing sort of the human-centered design thing. So it's called Facilitators Q&A because it's topics that are near and dear to people in charge of moving groups forward in the decision-making process and the creative process. Just looking at the group, I'm going to do like a super quick overview of the toolkit because a couple of you have already bought it. Billy, I think you're aware of what's in there, but like I'll do actually just the 1 minute version. It's basically bringing together the training and coaching I used to do in one-off workshops, and then adding in the resources and the templates that I use to lead problem framing workshops. Rick, is there anything else that you found valuable or something that if someone was looking at it, you'd want them to know was in there?
Yeah, like the sailboat exercise is really what we try to hone in on to get everybody on the same page. And again, we do a lot of the work, not for design sprint necessarily, but more from a strategy perspective, and then get through the prioritization, because everybody has a different vested interest in what needs to float up to the top. If we skip the prioritization, if we're running like a really mini version, we'll get them to vote on the post-its. But getting to that problem framing breakdown, just getting the problem statement straight, I find that's the best place where I think more light bulbs go on, because you get people, like you said before, coming in from different angles, trying to solve what they thought was the problem. And I usually get the most interesting conversations around the actual problem itself in that, I think it's slide number 11 or mural number 11 or whatever. I think it's 11, I can't remember. Or I pieced it together from your slide deck. Oh, okay. So you have a slide. Sorry, I created a mural. So I took the problem. So you do it, I think, in step number 8, but I actually, I took one of your PowerPoint slides and I have areas to fill in around who the persona is.
Cool.
What's the actual impact? Where is it impacted? So I just put all that on a single slide.
Nice.
It seems to work quite well.
Good. I'm glad. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. And just as a final piece, if you're not familiar with the toolkits, sort of like the workhorse of the toolkits themselves, there's the training, but within the resources and templates, there are digital templates like this one in Miro, and then there's a very comparable one in Mural. Hopefully I'm working with Envision. It's a slow conversation, but I'm working with them to get support inside of Freehand. And I've just started talking to Figma. So maybe have some support across a few different digital whiteboarding tools like these. Cool. That's the toolkit. Let's see. Anyone ask any additional questions while we were? If not, I'll answer a couple of these. Oh, this one got a +1, it looks like. Okay. Format to share research in, direct quotes, summaries, etc. Yeah. Designing research is a newer concept to me. I've learned that phrase over the last few years. Most of the time, my research is a scripted set of questions that I ask people about to validate and inform the problem that we're attempting to solve. And so I do that research over Zoom calls. I record it. I have a Google Sheet with all my questions, and while I'm listening to them, I'm just like capturing words in the Google Sheet. And then what I do is I pull that stuff out and I create a mural or mural board with information about who each of the personas was, a summary of the different questions that I asked with sort of like some kind of visual connection to how they addressed those questions. And so like, and because Miro also allows for rich media to be added and embedded on the boards, then when there's a really important thing that they said, then I'll capture like a snippet of the video or just extract the audio from that and add it in there, and I'll play it. So it looks, no. Man, too many mural rooms. This is a sprint I did a couple months ago in the auto industry. So this is kind of like, I'll just stay zoomed out just for confidentiality. This is what our research looked like overall, right? So like there was one persona we were sort of like working within. We did some switch interviews, some like jobs to be done style interviews with them to capture jobs that they were trying to do, pains that they experienced with it, what they were hoping to get out of solutions that would solve for those pains. And then here's like sort of the deeper dive as we spoke with each person. So this is what it looks like. And in here, there's a couple places. I think these like circles are somewhere in here are audio snippets that you could double click on it and play the audio snippet. And then everything is, all of the interviews are captured on Zoom recorded calls, which we store in Drive. And then this whole board becomes a dashboard to get to all of those different resources. So this is what it looks like.
Hi, I'm sorry, Jay. Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And I apologize because I had issues joining, so I was a little bit late, and I'm not sure if this was already covered. I'm, super, super green to this. I just started diving in to your toolkit and your framework and all those things. And I just wanted to get clarity on kind of the first step. So if you could maybe provide an example of what would kick off the problem framing discovery, like is it a feature idea or a problem? I think somebody, I see a posted like, who defines a problem is indeed a problem. So I'm just curious, like what do folks come to you with where you have that light bulb moment of, okay, yes, a problem, this is perfect for a problem framing discovery?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So one, totally dive into some of these questions in here, because I think there's some that you'll find helpful to go back and listen to the conversation that we had about it. And then to address your question directly, most of the time it's changing, it's evolving. It could just be I'm working with different people these days, but when we were a software design and development company, they were coming to me with solution ideas. So they were coming to me with like RFPs, or just like a list of features and things they wanted to be built as a new experience, as an evolved experience. And then I would back them up into the problem space. And when I didn't know exactly what I was doing, I would just get them to articulate something like, we're trying to improve onboarding, something like this. When I truly understood that it was about the customer, not about that doesn't mean it. Improving onboarding means nothing to your customers. What does mean something to them is I just paid for the service and don't know how to get started. I don't know what the right first step is. And because of that, I can't solve for what your product intends to solve for. So it's like it's a backwards set of steps from where people traditionally start is, this is the thing I want you to build or create or fix. Okay, what's the problem you're trying to solve? They sometimes will often have enough insight to tie it back to a business problem that's important to the company. And then where problem framing really gets its superpower from is it humanizes the problem in order to connect it to the problem that, if solved for the customer, will create the impact that the company is looking for. So it's sort of that intersection between important to the business and current challenge or pain point for the customer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some other good stuff in there that I think you'll find helpful. The starting point is always squishy though, because it depends on who the person is, how open-minded they are, the context of what they've already done, what they've invested in, what they've already figured out. So let me say, what tends to trigger the need for that was Nicole. Thanks for the question, Nicole. Cool. Well, Are there any other questions that anyone wanted to jump in with? We're almost at time, but we have plenty of time for more questions if there are any. I'm just double checking that there are none that I didn't answer. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll drop into the chat. I will drop my email. Feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email. If other questions come up, I'm happy to answer them. A couple of you, I couldn't see the entire list of people. That's one thing about Zoom. So if you join late and have questions, feel free to just write me directly. Or even better would be to add them to the Miro board, and I will address them in an upcoming event. Like I mentioned, the next one is Design Sprints, which is on Wednesday, July 14th. And then the next problem framing will be out in September.
Hi, Jay. Would it be okay to ask one more question here?
Yeah. We've got time.
Just because I see there's about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, hi. I'm curious, one thing that I've oftentimes run into is the lack of time commitment. So oftentimes a good problem framing, will take a few hours and sometimes even multiple sessions. And I think sometimes I found that with multiple stakeholders, the higher up they are, the more difficult it is to get, you might be happy to just get 1 hour of time once a week. How would you kind of navigate that space in terms of either would you fight for more, try and get parts done, or what would you sacrifice, or how would you go about navigating that space?
Yeah. I've answered this somewhere else. I'm definitely going to answer you, but I also wanted to point out, because I might do like, I might have done a better,
Yeah.
no, totally okay. I might have done a better job in the past. There's somewhere in here, I think I answer a question similar to this. So the people not wanting to spend time on problem framing, which is like an abstract, weird thing to be doing for most people, totally makes sense. So if you're facing that, it's very normal at first. We were talking earlier about selling in and positioning the need for framing by telling stories, by describing what might go wrong or where things might go sideways if we're not clear on the problem. So that's probably one component, is just to make sure that people understand the value of framing, because once they lean in a little bit, then what you could also do as a next step is to chunk down framing. Like my process is super comprehensive. You might call it very idealistic, that you could get people together for 2 or 3 half-day sessions to really articulate the problem. But I tend to find that it works really well if we do. And for companies for leaders or people that will only spend even just 1 hour, Rick and I were just talking about this. So even just to get them to, this is what my framing process looks like. Even just to get the groups to spend 30 minutes individually completing this problem statement. Who's experiencing the problem? What's it about? When's it happening? Why is it important for us and the user and the customer to be solved? And how might we measure success? Even just individually inviting people to answer that question, and then gather how everyone addressed it, and showing often the disparity of the misalignment between everyone involved in the conversation in terms of what they think the problem is, how important it is, things like that. That's often enough to buy an additional block of time to do more of the framing process. So if you're short on time and people are like, what is this thing you're asking me to do? This is a good experiment. And even if you can't get them to come together for an hour, sometimes I'll just email them individually a document and have them fill this in. And then I'll capture it and put it back out in front of the group. just to point out some of the misalignment.
Right. So I think what is most interesting is start with creating a wedge and kind of opening a gap in their assumptions almost, so that people feel the need to align and possibly make more time and effort because they see the difference in gaps.
Yeah.
In opinions. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
Good
so much.
reflection. Yeah. Just to build on top of what you just said. Yes. To allow them to see the value. Everyone has to see the value for themselves in their own context and how they measure the world and how they're measured within the world. So by just like putting examples in front of them and having them do just bite-sized chunks of things, they'll attach the meaning to it. They'll be like, oh, okay, so if I spend time here, it would actually help me qualify if this thing that I've been pushing is actually worth working on. Something like that, right? Then it's their own context.
Right. I think I've been trying to work with online and offline context of opening up these gaps, sharing the work, but then oftentimes people will miss a meeting and then they'll feel once again misaligned. And I feel like the beauty is the alignment buy-in happens by being part of the process. Do you have any tips to how to engage people who aren't part of the process in terms of getting that buy-in and alignment without just trying to convince them?
Two ways that I'll be efficient in terms of answering. One is to do one-on-ones with them before, during, after, to say, this is what we're going to do. Do you have ideas, concerns, constraints that you'd like to be part of the conversation, even though you can't join it? And I'll do my best as the facilitator to make sure the group is aware of that. Otherwise, I just do the session without them and then come back and give a playback to them. Many times, let's say, often enough, if I capture it and sort of like synthesize it well enough, they feel like it would be a good use of their time to attend the next one.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, when you do that, just make sure the group, I always tell people, make sure the group is aware. Hey, Sally and Joe couldn't join us today. This is their thing, but they can't be with us. So we're just going to spend a couple hours today sort of reframing it a bit so that we're clear on it. And then we'll have a bunch of questions and gaps that we're aware of. And then I'll take it, or whomever will take it, and we'll go back to senior leadership and we'll share where we're at. And we may have to do this again with them, but this is a good place to start so that they're not looking at a blank canvas and unable to join our sessions.
Right. And I think sometimes I just feel like a chicken with my head cut off, running from person to person, doing one-on-ones. My job is a design researcher. And so I'm trying to gain clarity around, let's prioritize, understand the sequence and priority of needs, because oftentimes with sequence comes priority. And so it's just kind of feel like I have I have to run from person to person, and then I have to do my day job. Yeah. So I appreciate these tips and and appreciate what you do as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, you and Anne should talk. Researchers are in a tough spot most times.
Yep.
And always one for every 10 designers and every 50 engineers.
Yeah. Currently the only design researcher in a 2,500 person company.
Nice.
So
wow. I'm the only one too, Mark. We should definitely talk.
There you go.
Yes. Maybe can I get your email? This is coming too personal. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll connect with you on LinkedIn right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Any other last minute questions? Cool. Well, this board is here forever. So you can come back to it, look through the previously recorded answers. Later today-ish or tomorrow, I'll send you all an email with a recap and links to this stuff so that you can go and find it easily. But thank you all for being here. Great questions, great engagement. I look forward to the next one.
Jay.
Thanks, Rick.
That's awesome.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jay.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.